Hello everyone, and in this video we are going to be taking a look at adding props to the character that we did in the week 5 lab. And in this video we're going to be adding a gun to his hand because if you remember his animation from last time, when he lands he kind of just doesn't shoot anything. He's just got his hand opened inside of the scene. So we're going to be doing some stuff with pose control. We're going to be importing an asset. We're going to be using constraints. We're also going to set up some cameras to kind of tie this whole scene together. And this should be helpful in setting up your major assignment too. Whether you're going to be working in Maya, Motion Builder, or some game engine, this workflow is probably going to be very similar to what you're going to be doing for your final project. So, there are some assets that you're going to have to download for this one. I've got this laser gun that I've downloaded. If we go to the asset browser, I've got this week 7 lab folder that's got this file in it. And I already have this open here inside of our Motion Builder editor. And to start this off, what we're going to do is we're going to import that gun asset and start editing this up. So I'm going to open up the Week Lab 7 folder, and there's this pistol laser that I downloaded from the 3D Assets site that I gave you guys for the course. And I'm going to do an FBX merge with no animation. And this thing is massive. Okay, it's bigger than the character, so we're going to have to scale it down. There's a couple of materials here and there that aren't coming in, but I wouldn't worry about that too much. It's not going to be too much of a problem for this scene. So the first thing we need to do is scale this down. So I'm going to go to the toolbar on the right hand side here, and I'm going to go to the scale tool, and I'm just going to scale this uniformly until I get it roughly the size that I would like it to be. And I'll turn on the move tool and move this asset upward. And we're going to use a constraint to tie this to his right hand because that's the hand that he's using to shoot inside of this scene. So I'm going to go down to the constraints area inside of the navigator, and we're going to add a constraint. So I'm going to right click the constraints area in the navigator, go to insert constraint, and I'm going to select parent child. And the parent child constraint, we can drag the gun. So I'm going to open up the scene. And inside of the scene, I believe Cubo is the gun, so I'm going to rename Cubo here to laser. And I'm going to drag and drop laser into the constrained object. And we're going to want to constrain it to the wrist, the right wrist. So inside of the character controls of the Human IK panel, we should be able to select the right wrist. And that will highlight it inside of the navigator for us. So I'm going to open up the character reference here, and you'll see that the right wrist effector is selected, and you can drag and drop that into the source parent. Now that we have that all set up, we can then check off the active option, and you'll see that it positions the gun into the position of where the wrist is, but it's not oriented correctly. We're going to need to rotate this around and orient it in the correct manner. So I'm going to go to the rotation tool, and I'm going to rotate this thing around like this, and I'm going to move it outward. Whoops, I'm actually grabbing the control. I grabbed the wrong thing, so let me back this up a bit. There we go. We want to grab the gun. So make sure you don't grab the controller, make sure you grab the gun, and that's what we're going to want to rotate around here. I accidentally grabbed the effector there. That's no fun. And I'm going to move this thing. Now you'll see that my orientation pivot tool is in line with the asset, and that's because I have it set to local here. So to switch between local and global, it's F6 and F5, or you could go up to this panel here and change it. So the gun is still kind of big. It's a little bit bigger than I would like it to be. So I'm going to go down to scale and continue to scale this uniformly down till it's an appropriate size. And I'm going to take the weapon and place it so that's inside of his hand. And I might need to go to some of the other perspectives to do this. I'm not sure. It looks like it's in a pretty good shape here. I I just need to rotate it slightly, maybe to get it in better alignment with the hand. And I'll move it in here. And it looks like it's in a pretty good spot. You kind of want to have it like so that the weapon is cradled inside of the palm here. If you look at the U shape, it's kind of hard to see with the X-ray on, so I'm going to go to display and do models only. And you can see here the back of the gun here, it's kind of cradled in between the palm of the hand and the thumb. Alright, and I think that's in a good spot now. So if we scrub through, we'll see that, oh, it's not set to active anymore. Somehow, I guess I backed it up to the point where I needed to set this active. So this has to be active for it to stay in place. So I'll just readjust this real quick. It's a good thing I checked that ahead of time. Rotate around, move that up, and get it so that it's cradled inside of the hand here. I think maybe rotate it a bit. And move it outward some. And I think I might roll a little bit in this direction. Alright, so now that this is active is checked off in the constraint, this should move up my character now. I just want to make sure that everything is roughly in the correct position here. So I'm just going to scrub through the timeline. You can see he grabs the gun, fires it around. Cool. Alright, so the constraint is working. It just, it doesn't look natural because his hand isn't posed up properly. So that's what we're going to do next with our control rig, is pose up his hand. So I'm going to turn back on my display to X-ray, and that'll bring back all of the controls here. And what we could do is start setting this up. I think I'm just going to adjust the gun a little bit more, tweak it a little bit more so that the trigger finger is in line with where the trigger is. And I'm going to go down to the right hand control by clicking on this arrow here in the human IK panel, and that'll allow me quick access to select my controls. So I'll select the control for the index finger, the trigger finger, and I'm going to try and rotate first and rotate this closed a bit. And then I'm going to move the trigger finger into position using the move tool. And I think I moved it a little bit in the wrong direction. And if you need to alternate from the X-ray mode, you can hit Control A, and I'll cycle through the different modes here. And it looks like the trigger finger's in a good spot there. I'm going to pose the thumb a bit. Maybe back it up some. And then our fingers, I'll grab these fingers here, and you don't need to have the controls visible to be able to select them. I don't have them visible. I'm selecting them from the human IK panel, and I'm going to rotate the fist close a bit. And I'll translate the fingers down, maybe in and out some. And if we scroll around here, we want to make sure that the outside looks okay. And I think we've got a pretty good grip on this gun. Alright, so I think that looks pretty good where it's at. Now we don't want to start animating this just yet because we want to create a pose for this. We want to pose this so that if we need to bring this back to where it is, and we can. And I'm going to bring in these a little bit more. Actually, I need to rotate this some to bring it in more. And then move it down and inward here. There we go. That's better. Alright, so that's much better. I think that looks a lot better. Alright, so now what we'll do is we'll set up the pose control for this. So you're going to jump to your pose control tab, which is right here. And you're going to want to select all of the controls for the hand. And what we'll do, and I'll also grab the wrist as well. And I'll set up a pose by hitting the plus key. And you'll see that it adds the thumbnail graphic for the gun. Now, what will happen is if I scrub through my timeline, you'll see we lose that pose, right? So it's important to have that pose control so that if we ever lose it, we can get it back. So if I open up my poses and double click on the hand for the character, you should see now that it's back to the way it was when we made the pose. Okay. Now, with all of these controls selected, I'm going to deselect the wrist here and select all of the finger controls, and I'm going to key them. So on my animation layer, I will hit the key, and now if I scrub through, see, I'll go to the end when he's shooting and focus in on the gun, we'll see that his hand is still somewhat oriented in the correct position. We might have to key the fingers out a bit here. Let's see what's going on there. Yeah, so we might have to key them out when he lands. So let's go to where he lands. He starts firing the gun, because this is probably going to be in the shot. And then what I'll do is I will select these three fingers and move them out so they're not clipping through the gun as far. Actually, let's rotate those out a bit. There we go. And I'll key those on our animation layer there. Nice. Alright, so we've got the gun handle all set up now. It's in the scene. It seems to be playing correctly. You could go in and start editing some of the motion for this. Maybe his head looking down the barrel of the sight, maybe what he's aiming at with the gun, maybe make some adjustments to that. But what I would suggest doing is start setting up cameras for what your different shots would be for this scene, and then make those edits according to what's visible inside the cuts, because you'll do a lot of unnecessary animation doing this sort of thing. So we'll rewind back our animation here, and let's start setting up some cameras. So to set up our first camera, you go up to View, and you go down to Perspective, and then Create Camera, and that will create a camera inside of the scene. Now, what I'm going to do is look through this camera to be able to aim it where I want it to be in the scene. So to look through the camera, I'll go to View, and then Look Through Selected. And now we're actually looking through the camera that we have set up. Now it's helpful to have your producer perspective also visible while you're doing this. So what we'll do is we'll go up to View, and I will go to Viewer Layout, and we'll do 2 panes. And then inside of this view here, I will change the view to a producer perspective. So we can see there's our camera that we're looking through here. And if I move it around, you can see I'm moving around the camera just by adjusting how I'm viewing the character. Alright, so I kind of want this view where the camera's going to be down low, and it's going to track the cyborg as he's jumping off of this platform. Now we could key in those animations, but Motion Builder has a handy feature here called the camera interest. It's this locator here that's at the end of the visibility of the camera, and we can use constraints to be able to animate this camera with our character. So I'm going to go back and go to display X-ray here. Maybe not for this view, but for this view. I'm clicking into the view to be able to alternate between these. Now what I can do is create a constraint for that camera interest. So what we'll do is we'll go down to constraints and right click, and we'll insert a constraint, and what we'll do is we'll do a parent-child constraint, And the child of this constraint is going to be that camera interest from the camera that we just created. And the source, or the parent, we can make it be any of our controls on this character. So if I go to to controls here, if I head back out to the controller window, and I say I wanted to aim at the head, I could select the head, and then go up to the scene in the reference and look for the head inside of the navigator here and drag and drop that in and set it to active. And you can see now we're aiming our camera at the head of the character. I don't really like this view, the way it's focusing, or like the focus of this view, because it's cutting out a lot of the character's motions. So I think I'm going to change the effector. Instead, we'll do the hips. So I'll select the hips, and we'll find the hips inside of our navigator and drag and drop that into the constraint. And you can see that the camera will shift. And if we watch, that's much better. It keeps him in the scene, and we can actually watch him land. Now, Motion Builder has a really handy editing tool called the camera switcher that allows you to key between different cameras very quickly to compose one of these scenes. And I'm going to add another camera here, and what we'll do in the end of this is switch between those different cameras. So here when he lands, I'm going to cut to another camera when he stands up, and this camera is going to track when he shoots with the gun. Okay. So what we'll do is I'll go to my producer perspective area here, and I'll go to view, and what we'll do is go to perspective and create another camera. I'm going to select the camera view on the left here, and then go to view, look through selected, so that we can see through this selected camera now. You can see now we're editing camera 1. And I think I'm going to frame this up here. I want to get to the point in the animation where he's shooting, because that's where this is going to start. So it'll be right about here. And I kind of want to have this camera be in line with the gun, but I don't want it tracking the gun. If I have it tracking the gun, the camera's going to bounce around a lot. And his back shoulder is pretty steady the entire time in the animation. So what we're going to do is we're going to tie our camera's position to the rotation of this, or the translation of this back shoulder, and its interest. So I'm actually going to put 2 constraints on this camera to be able to follow it. So I want to get into a good view here, and we're going to create a new constraint. So I'll go down to my constraints, right click, insert constraints, do another parent-child constraint. And this particular constraint, the child object is going to be the actual camera 1. And the source parent is going to be that left shoulder. So I'll select the left shoulder, go in here, drag and drop the left shoulder into this, and set it to active. And you can see that it kind of pulls the camera right up to that shoulder now. But what we can do is zoom out now in that camera perspective on the left, and rotate it to where we want it to be. Like this. Maybe back it up a little bit. Just need to adjust my mouse to be able to fine tune this some. There we go. And the last thing would be to add one more constraint. So we're going to add another constraint. This one's going to be for that camera 1 interest. So I'm going to go down to my constraints, and I'm going to create a new one. This is going to be another parent constraint. So it's going to be insert constraint, parent child. And the child is going to be camera interest 1. And the parent is going to be that left shoulder again. We're going to aim basically at that left shoulder. So let's take the left shoulder. Whoa, I'm dragging something where it's not supposed to. There it is right there. And drag that into the constraint and set that to active. And you can see that the camera automatically shifts. So now this camera, you can see as it tracks, it does this really neat thing where we're actually watching the cyborg fire. Now I can adjust this camera a little bit if I want to. And there we go. I think I want to make the camera a little bit lower. And remember, it's only these frames where he's shooting. Cool. Now this last part here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut to another camera when he's finished shooting and starts to go down. And he doesn't go completely down into like a neutral position at the end of this animation, but that would be the point where we would cut to our next camera. So I'm going to create one more camera here. So I'm going to go up to View and then Perspective and create camera. And I'm going to click into this view here and then go to View, look through Selected. And what we'll do is we'll get this camera into a position here. I'm going to change my display just so that it shows the models only. And this particular camera is just going to pick up this movement when he's finished shooting. So I want to make sure that the gun is entirely framed here. Maybe lift the camera up some. And there we go. Alright, so we have 3 cameras. There's going to be no constraints on this particular camera because it's just going to be a static camera inside of the scene. So the last thing would be to bring this all together into a specific view here. Now to do that, we're going to use something called the camera switcher. So I'm going to go up to View and I'm going to select the camera switcher, and you can see that the camera switcher shows up here. And to be able to access the editor for the camera switcher, you go down to where it says cameras inside of your navigator and then double click on the camera switcher. And you can see this camera switcher kind of shows up as like a timeline, and it's got each of our cameras that are available inside of our scene labeled up above in blue, yellow, and purple. Now, if I scrub through, you can see we're only on camera 1 the entire time, and we want to switch between all of these. So this allows you to go to negative frames to be able to have like some sort of lead-in time, but we'll start off on frame 0. So I'm on frame 0 here, and what I'll do is make sure that you have that green border around camera 1, but watch if I switch here, it'll cut between the different cameras. So I can key this here, and you'll see that camera 1 gets keyed in on this frame. And I'll scrub through my timeline to where he lands and then start shooting. And this is where I'll key to camera 2. So I'll select camera 2 and I will key that here. And it's pretty straightforward how this works. You can delete keys, you can clean up, and you can key animations here. Alright, so you can see now if I look at that camera switcher view on the left, he jumps and then goes into this view where he's shooting. And then at the end of this, I want to be on the moment where he is about to put his gun down. So right about here, I want to create a key. Not for this camera, but for this camera. So I'll hit key again. And there it is. There's a full scene. So I'm going to hit the play button. And there it is. The completed scene. So in the next video, we're going to take a look at rendering this scene out, because if you want, you could render your scene out from Motion Builder, or you got to prepare it for export into whatever game engine you're working on, or if you're bringing this into Maya, 3ds Max, Blender, or whatever to do a final edit for a render. If you're using some sort of render that's better than what's going on in Motion Builder. But you can render this whole thing and light it and everything right inside of Motion Builder, get rid of the grid and all that. We're going to look at that in a future video as well. But in the next video, we're going to take a look at different techniques for exporting this and rendering it for the final product.